This is where I thrash.
Today we are ranking 30 of the best and worst thrash metal albums of 2024, and we're starting with Morbid Saint with Swallowed by Hell. Morbid Saint is responsible for what I consider to be one of the last great thrash metal albums of the classic era in Spectrum of Death, only to basically drop off the face of the earth. That's an incredible amount of pressure to overcome, but I'm thankful to say that the boys managed to live up to the hype. Right from the appropriately titled Rise from the Ashes, these guys bring the speed and aggression as if they never left. I really enjoyed it. It is going to perfection. Then we have Surgical Strike with 24/7 Hate. This German band has been around since 1993, but this is only their second full-length record. Not a ton to say here, some pretty wicked guitar work, but the songwriting feels a little generic, and I really don't like the vocals. And that's from someone who generally loves German thrash metal. They just aren't nearly as aggressive and imposing sounding as, say, Creator or Sodom, so I'm putting them at okay. Then we have Suicidal Angels with Profane Prayer. Formed in 2001, this is the Greek thrash metal band's 8th full-length record. Very solid riffing that at times feels more aligned with early 2000s melodic death metal and metalcore in its approach. From the first song, I was getting notes of everything from At the Gates to Darkest Hour and As I Lay Dying. The vocals, on the other hand, are pure traditional thrash, but this is unfortunately the weakest element for me. Again, I don't really care much for Nick's voice or delivery here, sort of a We Have Sepultura at Home energy. That said, taken as a whole, this is still a strong listen overall, with some standout melodic moments alongside the Ragers. I'm putting them right at the middle at great. Next up is Atrophy with Asylum. The Arizona band's first album in 34 years, following up 1990's Violent by Nature and 1988's Socialized Hate. Digging the more gravelly vocals, seeming to take some influence from German bands like Creator and Sodom, but the riffs run the gamut from bulldozer chugfest to soaring melodic leads as on the end of High Anxiety. Fairly dynamic listen with plenty of variety in the pacing and songwriting to keep things interesting, and all the while keeping that classic thrash metal sound, and they landed a spot at fantastic. Ooh, and next up is the divisive band for me to always talk about, Exhorder, with Defectum Omnium. Now, I've been kind of rough on Kyle for his Yarly vocals, but I will say that's largely in discussion around the early albums, which tends to make people mad. But I think he has improved quite a bit going deeper into his career, and lead single Year of the Goat actually got me pretty hyped for this album given just how fun and heavy it is. Unfortunately, the rest of the album was a real downer. The lyrics are obvious, the music largely forgettable, and then there are still groovers like the Tale of Unsound Minds where the Jarl just starts to annoy me again. Disappointing. I really did want this to be awesome, y'all. Like, I didn't go into this being like, oh, Exhorder, can't wait to tear them down again. Like, I want bands to succeed, and that song was a slapper, but yeah, no, it just didn't pan out. It landed at okay tier.
You blew it!
Then we have Sahon with Blood Shall Be Paid. Now, I've covered a lot of international bands, but this may be my first South Korean thrash metal band. Aggressive, lo-fi production and punk rock attitude are the name of the game, with plenty of D-beat, great old school energy. If a little lacking in memorability, I put them at good tier. That brings us to Oxygen Destroyer with Guardian of the Universe. This Seattle kaiju-inspired band brings the most craterous elements of death metal, black metal, and thrash metal, but overall I'd say they lean most heavily on the latter. Regardless, this is some insanely destructive music that fully lives up to the Gamera carnage of the cover art. Not much to say as the premise is fairly simple, with blast beats, blackened snarls, blazing riffage, but highly recommended to fans of everything from Morbid Saint and Demolition Hammer to Vader and Hellripper. Best to just experience it for yourself. I put them at great tier. Ooh, keeping on that blackened train, we have Midnight with Hellish Expectations. This is the album I've been wanting this Cleveland blackened speed metal band to make since the very beginning. For all the hype, I've always found myself lukewarm on their recordings, especially the more they have ventured into longer tracks, which I just think is not something most thrash metal bands can do. Some bands can do it. There are those progressive thrash bands that nail it. Obviously, there are classics like 1, 2, but yeah, for the most part, I think less is more in this genre. So here they shaved it down to the bone, 10 tracks, all under 3 minutes for a seriously lean runtime of 26 minutes, and not a second of it wasted on anything less than Full Speed Ahead, Motorcycle, Exhaust, and Blasphemy. I absolutely loved it. It is going to perfection. Then we have Devastation with Rise of the Dead. The third full length from this Belgian blackened thrash and speed metal band, emphasis on the black metal here. In fact, on some level, I have trouble even calling this a thrash metal album. But then you get a riff like the one at the end of Unholy Ritual or Necronomicon, and there's no denying the influence. But regardless, this is another ripper of a record, full of jangly, arthritis-inducing tremolo picking, imposing kind of Dimmu Borgir-esque vocals, and rollicking D-beats that landed them a spot at fantastic. Next up is Mother of All with Global Parasitic Leviathan. This Copenhagen-based band formed in 2013, they're seemingly known more as melodic death metal, but on this album it just feels much more thrash metal to me, especially in the riffs and the raspy vocals. Now musically and from a production standpoint I really like this, but the vocals rob this thing of its more complex and progressive elements with this very one note, one cadence, rah 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 kind of delivery that drags it down. So that put it at good tier. Then we have Battlecreek with Maze of the Mind. Album 3 from this German band, solid enough stuff for something very by the book. The production is good and the guitar work is fun if kind of familiar. Also some really killer bass guitar, especially on Goliath's Revenge. The element that I do have some issues with is again the vocals, which are also incredibly one note. I think this tends to be my biggest losing point for a lot of thrash albums is when you have this very not dynamic performance. Just kind of reminds me of Tom Araya, but more monotonous. Like this guy pretty much uses the same note for every word, and then when he does try to sing more like on Pleasures of the Hangman, it just falls flat. Yeah, this is going to okay. Next up is Wraith with Fueled by Fear. Album 4 from this Indiana band, and I'm pretty torn on it. On the one hand, I dig their sound, which is described as blackened, but I'd argue is most closely aligned with bands like Power Trip. Plenty of attitude and darkness on personal favorites here like Fueled by Fear, Ice Cold Bitch, and Vulture. Unfortunately, listening to the album feels like 46 minutes of more or less playing the same song on repeat. It just needs a little bit more songwriting variety, but still, it was one I enjoyed kind of at the middle level here, so it's going to great. And we have Evildead with Toxic Grace. No disguise, spread just like disease, pollution of your mind. The fourth album from this California band formed in 1987, following up 2020's United States of Anarchy. All-around performances I would describe as solid, just nothing super remarkable, and maybe slightly above average. Plenty of great riffs and good variation from song to song to keep things interesting. The vocals feel a little bit run-of-the-mill, but work perfectly fine in tandem with this music. Not one of my favorites, but a strong recommendation. It landed at good tier. And we have Critical Defiance with The Search Won't Fail. The third album from this Chilean group formed in 2010, another one bringing that pure old school energy in a somewhat similar vein as Dark Angel without any modern flourishes. Even the production has a bit of a retro feel to it. Killer speed and energy, and the songwriting is pretty strong. My one complaint is that same one that I've mentioned many times before. I don't think that thrash metal has any business doing songs over 3 minutes or so, with a few on this one ranging over 6 to nearly 10. Again, there are exceptions to the rule like Holy Wars, but not everyone can pull it off. But still, I wouldn't say it's enough to ruin this record. I think shorter would be better. I think that would put it at maybe even top tier, but as it stands, it landed at fantastic. Then we have Belushi Speedball with Stellkira. The third album from this Kentucky crossover band, whose band name I personally find to be really stupid. I love crossover thrash, and I think thematically there is a lot for me to enjoy here, but the execution just feels all off. Lots of killer riffs that also infuse elements of heavy metal and melodeath, but clunky songwriting and the vocals in particular just don't do it for me. Props for the Akira reference in the cover art, though. I guess I'll give them that. But yeah, this landed at okay for me. Next up is Holycide with Towards Idiocracy.
Social media, it's a lie.
The third album from this group out of Spain, and another one that's all around well performed with plenty of great thrash energy and riffs, but ultimately just leaves my brain the instant it's over. Sometimes it's hard to put my finger on what makes a more standard by-the-numbers thrash album higher or lower on the list, but based on my experience with this one, I would guess it mostly comes down to having mostly memorable riffs or vocal hooks, and I just don't think that this necessarily has either. Still an enjoyable listen though, so it's going to good. And we got a Big Daddy here with Kerry King, From Hell I Rise. Now, I had pretty low expectations going into this one based on the singles and also just generally not being big on solo albums, but it ended up being pretty enjoyable. The riffs are solid, still bringing plenty of that Slayer speed and energy, if sounding a little bit recycled at this point. The vocal performance is serviceable, kind of feels like a cross between Araya and DRI's Kurt Brecht. I think my biggest detraction is the lyrics, which are about as lame and predictable as they come. Not every song is great either, with some like two fists feeling like they were slapped together in a few minutes to fill out the runtime. Still though, I do think it kind of made the middle tier here. I enjoyed it enough, and frankly, there's a lot of albums on this list that don't have great lyrics and have some filler songs, so I don't know. I put this one at great tier, actually pretty high up on that level as well. Then we have Deceased with Children of the Morgue. Even when considering the early formative years of the 80s, I have a hard time calling the 11th album from this Virginia band death metal. I just think there's way more thrash and speed metal here, which is why it landed on this list. Also stuff on like the crust spectrum. Labels aside though, on that front, it cooks pretty well. Some really infectious moments as on Eerie Wavelengths and The Gravedigger, but also with several tracks crossing the 7 and 8 minute mark that can kind of drag at times. But overall, had a great time with it. It's going to fantastic. Next up is Darkness with Blood on Canvas. Album 6 from this German band formed in 1984. Pretty standard thrash metal with that heavy traditional instrumentation. Decent enough energy and solid gang vocal moments, but once more the riffs, while enjoyable, feel a bit generic, and often the lead vocals feel very corny to me, so they ended up at okay. By the way, if at any point you disagree with me, this is all subjective as usual, so share your own thoughts. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Down in the comments. Also, hit the like button if you're enjoying the video, or hit the dislike if you dislike. But next up, we have Vicious Blade with Relentless Force. Now, I was late to hear this one, so it didn't land on my best of September list, but this album from Pittsburgh, it's just awesome blackened thrash metal, just the way I like it. Formed by Clarissa Bedini of Castrator, this is just the type of fast and aggressive music I crave in the genre, alongside the likes of Midnight and Hellripper, maybe throwing a little bit of Arch Enemy in there as well. I'm going to put this one at perfection. Next up is Blacklist with Murderous Intent. This is the second album from this UK thrash band, mixing more traditional early thrash sounds with the blackened sound of Skeleton Witch and Necropanther. Add songs focused around the spooky likes of Alien, Halloween, and the Evil Dead, and this is mostly a match made in heaven for me. I will say that I vastly prefer the more blackened extreme elements to the ones with the cleaner vocals. The latter just kind of annoy me a lot of the time, so that dragged it down to good, but I think this has a lot of potential. Another big one here, Flotsam and Jetsam with I Am the Weapon. Another banger later career album from these legends. As I said in my tier list that you can check out, there are a couple songs on here that feel a little bit more generic, but thanks to the likes of A New Kind of Hero, Beneath the Shadows, Cold Steel Heights, Running Through Fire, and especially the ominous closer Black Wings, this still ends up being one of the stronger thrash metal albums of the year, and I'd put it pretty high in their discography. I wouldn't put it at the top, but it definitely earns a spot here at fantastic. Then we have Supermodel Taxidermy with At What Cost. Now, I generally quite enjoy crossover thrash, but this Canadian band lacks the same energy and impact of an Iron Reagan or a Municipal Waste for me. Solid if extremely generic riffs and songwriting, and then the vocals just have this very laid-back, uncaring quality to them. It's like reading the lyrics instead of feeling them, if that makes sense. It's their first album, so there's definitely room to grow, but yeah, this one I'm just gonna put at okay. We also have Witch Trap with Hungry as the Beast. Very solid 6th album from this Colombian band formed in 1992. Very evil and rebellious sounding thrash and speed metal with a blackened edge a la Venom this time. Another one with a production job too that really captures that 80s sound and got them a spot at great tier. And we have Hellbutcher with Hellbutcher. Following the disbanding of 90s black metal band Niflheim in 2022, frontman Hellbutcher started this new project, once more leaning on an old school sentiment with plenty of thrash and speed metal influence. Again, fans of Venom and early Bathory in particular should enjoy the jangly bass lines and emphasis on speed, but perhaps also fans of more modern takes like Midnight. Simple but very effective and devilishly fun. I put them at fantastic. There's also Disarray with Religious Disease. I'd call this a slower year for thrash, but there have been some gems, and this Swedish album is definitely one of them. With the ferocious vocals and mixture of all-out full-speed ragers and more mid-paced head-bobbers, I'm getting vibes for Dark Angel, Toxic Holocaust, and especially, again, Power Trip. Forbidden of Speech will absolutely blow your hair back and scalp you in the process as an opener, as will Bound to Kill and Realize You're Already Dead, and it gained them a spot at Perfection. Another little gem here, we have Feel the Knife with So Raw, So Nasty, So Hideous. I actually only came across this album because it showed up randomly in my YouTube recommendations right around the time fall was starting, so perfect timing. But man, I'm glad it did because this is basically this year's Ashes, Organs, Blood, and Crypts. It's actually the debut full-length album from this Argentinian thrash band, as if you couldn't already tell from the album art, it is soaked in 80s thrasher energy and the same old-school death metal vibes as Autopsy. So I'm going to put them at great tier, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. We also have Nasty Savage with Jeopardy Room. The 5th album from this US band formed in 1983, fairly by-the-numbers thrash with some pretty corny lyrics and vocal delivery, but alternatively also some cool moments of dark atmosphere, as with the opening of Southern Fried Homicide. Great title too, by the way. I describe it as frustrating, as I hear the potential for this to be awesome, and some of the riffs are pretty great, but it just never really fully coalesces. I gave them a spot at good. We have Vulture with Sentinels. Vulture is a German band that's been around since 2015. This is their 4th album, and especially with the vocals, I would compare their sound most to Exodus and Overkill. Regardless of where you put them on the spectrum, though, there is no denying the sheer speed and energy of these songs. I was headbanging like crazy mere seconds into opening track screams from the abattoir, and the guitar hooks continue to flow like wine from that point forward. Great retro production here, too, with heavy use of reverb. They went to fantastic. And you know what? I'm actually gonna put Hellbutcher at perfection. I enjoyed it that much. Which brings us to Cavalera Conspiracy with Schizophrenia re-recorded. The Brazilian Madmen have done it again, once more with one of my favorite albums from the Sepultura catalog, and remaking it as raw and heavy as ever. Not only did they largely keep the original arrangements too, the production still maintains that 80s metal spirit, from the distortion to the heavy use of reverb. This is how to do it right when it comes to re-recordings. I love the hell out of this thing. I listened to it back to back for many days. It also landed a spot at perfection. It's one of my favorites of the year. I would probably say that these are my top 3, though. Y'all check out this playlist for more thrash metal rankings, or this one for more rankings that are coming for 2024 by genre, but that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.